nights at 7 p.m. So I'm just going to acknowledge this recording if I can get that off the screen. See if I can get that off the screen. Can you all see that? This meeting is being recorded? Okay, yeah, I want to get that off the screen. I assume you can still see that. All right, let me get this. Got it. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. That just popped up there. So the point of the story is Cousteau was not a scientist, never pretended to be. He was curious, and he would put these people on camera so he could learn and we could all learn. Now, interesting about learning, because Cousteau, why are we looking at the planet Earth from outer space here? Well, or rather, we're in orbit here, and there's like a term called aquanauts. Aquanauts live underwater, and astronauts live in space, right? And I'm actually a certified aquanaut myself. And Cousteau was really one of the innovators of living in underwater habitats, and that's what an aquanaut does. They live in an underwater habitat, and I've done that myself. Here, this is the back of a gentleman, an astronaut named Russell Schweikart, Rusty Schweikart. And Cousteau had a wonderful relationship with NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and that led to a wonderful relationship with Rusty. In fact, I was able to, through the relationship, to intern for Rusty at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C., the bicentennial year of 1976. But really the point of showing this is Cousteau and NASA collaborated on figuring out, could they do remote sensing from space and correlate that with sensing being done off the ship of Calypso, taking water samples in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, and then doing through the first, it's called Landsat. Back in the day, it was called Earth Resources Technology Satellites, ERTS. And Cousteau worked with NASA on ERTS 1 and 2, which became Landsat 1 and 2, to figure out how can we look at the Earth, whether it's pollution or the forests or the water, population, the desert, et cetera, through incredible imagery from space and correlate that with ground truth information on the planet. So that's just a snippet on that topic. There's so much to talk about with this man and his accomplishments. Another one was, divers used to have to get equipped like this, literally, and you can see a hose that would run to the surface, typically running to an air supply on a ship, typically a large ship, and this cumbersome outfit the divers would have to work around. They couldn't move freely about underwater untethered until Cousteau invented the Aqualung. He co-invented the Aqualung with a gentleman named Emile Gagnon. And if you look at behind Cousteau's head, that little silver piece there, that's called a regulator. And that's really the key component of the Aqualung, where inside this, for television, there were a lot of things Cousteau would do, like, the black wetsuits with the yellow stripe, and then this fiberglass backpack that had the 2 scuba tanks in it. Looked pretty cool on TV. And in telling the stories and being an entertainer, you tried to have drama and make things interesting for the viewer. But that Aqualung allows the diver to breathe in and out just as you are breathing now in a comfortable fashion without having to, breathe in very hard or breathe out very hard. So that regulator, that device is regulating the air supply. This is actually a picture of me when I was a younger guy, and just back from a dive, bringing the tanks back onto the ship. And you can see this is not encased in the fiberglass. Typically, the people that would be on camera would have the fancier equipment. I do have the sort of trademark wetsuit on here because I was on camera a little bit here, but typically I would be behind the lights or behind the camera. And by the way, I didn't start in the diver role. I started as a deckhand, which is the very bottom of the ladder, and worked my way up over several expeditions. I was on 4 expeditions. I'll tell you a little bit about those in a minute. In fact, right here, it seems like yesterday, but it was way back between 1973 and 1979. I just graduated from high school, and my father was going out to LA to meet with Cousteau. And actually, typically, I have a picture of my dad with Cousteau and his 2 sons, and I don't have that incorporated into this presentation, unfortunately, because I just lost my dad last month in October. But he lived a good long life, 89 years old, almost made it to 90 years old. And he was brought in, he was recruited, and he became Cousteau's business partner. My dad had a business background in educational television and publishing. So that was a perfect fit for Cousteau, because Cousteau was a prolific writer and over 100 television episodes. So, and my dad was a businessman, and Cousteau needed a businessman. So in fact, what happened is the first expedition, when I went out to LA that summer, right after graduating from high school, and we're having dinner with Cousteau the first night. And if you look up in the upper left-hand corner, you see a picture of a beaver. Well, they were driving a truck. They needed a guy to help drive a truck from LA to northern Saskatchewan, Canada. And I raised my hand, sort of, rather, Cousteau poked me at dinner and said, you know, would you like to help us drive this truck? And I did that. I just turned 18, and that was my beginning. And I'm tying that to business because they were in financial trouble, and to launch the ship and get a full crew out on the ocean for something would be a much more expensive expedition. By doing a rare land-based expedition, it was much more affordable. So that kind of helped the organization get itself a little bit back on its feet. And then subsequently, a year later, I had to leave and go to my freshman year of college. I wanted to stay the winter, but the team stayed, a small team, but they stayed the winter in a cabin I'll show you in a minute that we built. And they made a movie on beavers. Then the next fall, I went down to Florida, and we dove on stone crabs, if you go down from top to bottom, and with manatee. Then moving to the right, I returned on, it was the day after Christmas in 1974. I flew down to Mexico, and we made a movie on the migration of the spiny lobster. They migrate in single file, which is rather intriguing. And then below that, you see a grouper. We traveled south to Belize and made a movie on The Fish That Swallowed Jonah was the title, and it was called, it was about the grouper. And then finally, to the far right is my final expedition, which was focused on shipwrecks. And we'll see a little bit more about that. Right here, I'm featuring the Uss Monitor from the Civil War, if you remember the Monitor and the Merrimack. Mm-hmm. So we'll come back to that in a minute. I hope we're probably going a little bit long on time, but we started a little bit late.
It's okay.
Yeah, so here is just for fun, and I show this to the kids because I tell you, this is before the internet, this is before cell phones, before notebook computers, etc. And this is one of my actual handwritten journals, 1974, 1975. We were just talking about that. It looks like I've got a note here to remind myself about my passport. And up on the top right, it's a bird, a cacahuete. So I'm learning a new word, peanut butter, and so on. And then here you can see up in the upper right, it's December 26, 74. After a day of traveling, I finally boarded Calypso. I left New York at 9:55 a.m., arrived in Miami, etc. So what happened was my wife, Margaret, got tired of me talking about writing a book someday. So she helped me by taking my journals and typing them up for me. And of course, that was not the book, but that was a start, because then I it brought back memories. I could do, I have lots of mementos and files and stuff, so I could start crafting a story. And that's what I did. It took me several years to write it, and I actually self-published it. It's hard to find in bookstores. It is on Amazon and other online outlets. And if you contact me, I'm more than happy to. I'm willing and able to sign books and send them direct too. I don't do this for money. It's a labor of love, but I think it's a fun book. It's a simple book, probably for ages, pretty young and up. It's pretty clean and stuff like that. As I was telling Nancy, I think it's more of a coming of age story than an actual adventure and scuba book. So that might possibly be more appealing to a broader audience, but it is just the way it was. I view it as starting a little bit slowly because we talk about what we talk about driving the truck and all that, and then it gets more and more interesting as we ultimately culminate by diving on the USS Monitor and things like that. Now, I don't want to go too long, but I might as well show you. It's like a 2.5-minute piece I have here, and it's not in high definition. It's right off of YouTube. But for those of you that might not know Cousteau, this might tell you a little bit as well. And those that know of him, it'll bring back some memories. So we've talked about Calypso, so let's go to the video.
10 p.m. on the 20th day of April. Longitude 47 degrees east, latitude 10 degrees south. Depth 80 feet below the level of the sea. This is the coral jungle. Around the divers of Calypso, just beyond the circle of their lamps, night creatures move uneasily, stirred by the strange sight of man, the unaccustomed presence of light. Undersea explorers enter a well-ordered universe, seeking to learn its secrets, to observe and record its life, the strange, the beautiful, the tranquil, and the savage.
So let's see here. Just got to advance this a little bit. There we go. So I think I mentioned earlier, entertainment, entertainer, and I'm sure the music, the dramatic music, the well-written script, the narration by Rod Serling and some other great narrators. Joe Campanella was one of them. Made for an entertaining show. And back in the day.
I'm sorry, Richard, could you just turn your volume up just a little bit? It's getting a little hard to hear you.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, that was a little glimpse of history. And we talked earlier about Madame Mrs. Cousteau, or nicknamed La Bergère, which means the shepherdess in French, in her younger years and her older years with Captain Cousteau. She was a wonderful woman. She was on the ship all the time. It was her world, her microcosm. She'd rather be there than anywhere. And we were kind of her posse, if you will. if she was going, if we were in port, and she wanted to go shopping, she wanted 3 or 4 of us to tag along on the ship. She was the real captain. She was a disciplinarian. Her official title was nurse. She would cut our hair. She was just a great woman, and you know, I miss her a lot. She was a great woman. And I won't go through the entire crew, but another key person who actually was not on the ship that often when I was there, but certainly worth mentioning, is Philippe Cousteau, one of Cousteau's 2 sons. And the picture on the right I took, which is a very rare picture of Philippe without a beard. And this was taken when we were diving on the USS Monitor, approximately a week before Philippe died, maybe 2 weeks before Philippe died. That seaplane you saw in the video, there was an accident and the plane crashed, and he was the pilot, and that's how Philippe died on my final expedition. So we talked about the Beaver Expedition and how I drove a truck from LA up to northern Saskatchewan, quite north. It was a pretty cool experience. In brief, the whole drive was great, and once we got to Lake L'Orange, the town called L'Orange on the shores of Lake L'Orange. We had to fly. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. So we had to fly the supplies from the truck out to a campsite via seaplanes, and along with lumber and fuel and food, all things that we procured up there in Canada. But this was a fairly intense effort for, you know, a few people. And then we started building a cabin up there. This is actually me. I was pretty involved in building the cabin. And this is, you can see the cabins coming along. And this was for the crew to stay the winter. It was really a small group of people. You'll see a photo of them in a minute. But they stayed the winter. Now, today, this is a rather nice fishing camp. It still exists. And, you know, here again, you see actually the front of the plane, you can see the propeller spinning. So it's probably just getting ready to depart. Here is another time we were getting ready to depart, like a kind of like a farewell photo with a few, looks like most people actually signed this, and they sent this to me when I was off at college. The guy standing on the back left is named Bob McKeegan. He was the helicopter pilot. We had a helicopter up there, a former Vietnam pilot. I'm standing next to him with a checkered shirt. And then you have, going left to right, you have Philippe. Then you have Yvonne Giacoletto. Yvonne and I drove the truck up. And normally you would not have women with the crew here, but the fellow taking the photograph, it's his girlfriend standing, and Liz, and then kneeling is Jan Cousteau, Philippe's wife. And then moving back from right to left in the orange shirt is Guy Jouas. He was a sound man. Then the striped shirt is Louis Preslan, a Frenchman, but lives in Santa Barbara, a diver. And then a fellow named Tonton on the far left, sitting down with a blue sweater. Tonton was another cameraman, not a diver, but a land cameraman. So I mentioned, you know, the spiny lobster and the grouper. So let's take a look at that. I also had mentioned the day after Christmas, I flew down to the Yucatan. And this is just a crude map giving a little bit of illustration. I flew down, ultimately I got to Isla Mujeres, and then from there, the helicopter picked me up and we flew out to Isla Contoy. And there was only one person at this point in history that lived on the island. I believe this island has been a little bit more commercialized, unfortunately, now, but there was one person, and that was the lighthouse keeper. But what would happen is every year, legend had it that the lobsters would migrate through this area, roughly where that red line is. And, you know, this is before the internet. A lot of the research that was done was crude and you know, risky. So we were here for several weeks waiting for the lobsters to migrate. You need a storm, preferably from the north. And you know, we were there waiting for this to, the migration finally started, but then unfortunately the water got too murky. So it was very difficult to film underwater. So those are the kinds of challenges that Cousteau faced. And I suppose explorers and naturalists certainly face today as well, but certainly the tools are, and the intelligence is much more sophisticated these days. But one of the things we made this film, but also if you see along the shoreline, there's like a crusty shoreline on land. And what these fishermen would do is they'd come in for this period of time, this very short period of time, and they would, it was called a bonanza, and they would get hundreds and hundreds of lobsters. And some of these people, it would be enough to provide for their family for the year in you know, a modest fashion, I suppose. But what they would do is they would break the carapace, like, let me put it a different way. They break the tail off the body of the lobster. They collect the tails in their boat, and then they take the tails to market. But the rest of the body would be discarded on the shoreline. They wouldn't put it in the water because they feared that would scare away future migrations. And that was their what's the word I'm looking for? Well, it was their belief anyway, that their superstition. So this offered a great opportunity for me to go along the shoreline. And it wasn't always the most pleasant job, but it was interesting because we had one of the best lobster specialists on the planet on the ship with us, Dr. William Hernkine from Florida State University. And I was his assistant, and among other chores I had, but I did independent university research for the school I was going to. And but we could measure the bodies, hundreds and hundreds of these. We could look at their size, their length, their width, their sex, their coloration. And not only could we look at the fresh ones, but we could look at years past, you know, not too many years, but a couple of years past. So we could get some good data. And these were pretty sizable lobsters, and you'll notice they're not like the main lobsters that we're probably familiar with here. Pannularis americanus is the main lobster. This is Pannularis argus, and the South American spiny lobster. And these are actually pretty small ones compared to some of them, but they're still quite large. You can see the film box there. I put the film box there, and I asked the students if they know what that is. And of course, they don't know what that is because they're all used to digital. We would not catch our own seafood, lobsters or fish. We would trade for them. We'd trade cigarettes and wine with local fishermen. So we traveled south to Belize, formerly British Honduras. We sailed down there, and you can see where that line is. There's also on the Earth's crust there. That's the continental shelf, and the Earth really drops off. The depth really drops off there. But on the left side of that is also the Belize Barrier Reef, which extends most of that range, and it's the second largest barrier reef on Earth, second to Australia. So here we've arrived offshore of Belize. we've again, our research told us there was a certain spot we could go where these grouper would congregate, and they would be looking for a full moon, and they would congregate there, and they would reproduce. They would mate, and this was an annual thing, and they'd only be there for 2 or 3 days. It was another type of bonanza. And some of these people you could see are fishermen, and this boat in the background there is actually a pretty nice boat compared to some of the dugout canoes and stuff that would come up that were fishing. But we didn't know these people, they didn't know us, but they just came right over and climbed aboard, and we visited with them and we filmed them, and they were part of the story. You can see you know, the camera and the microphone boom down in the lower left. You know, we were always trying to record everything we could in case we could use the story. Another great thing, and one of the 2 highlights for me in my experience, was when John Denver visited us. Again, some of the young people might not know John Denver, although he's kind of, he's like everlasting in many ways. But I think the college fraternities play A Song at Midnight, Country Roads, which was one of his biggest hits. But I joke that John wanted to meet the frogs and the frogmen. So long story short, he made arrangements and he came out and joined us. And I had the opportunity to dive with John and got to know him quite well. He was with us about 4 days, and really super guy, a very genuine guy. And I wish he was still with us because he had a great voice for the environment as well. Cousteau and John here both passed away in the same year, which was quite sad for me. But here was, aside from diving with John and visiting with John, like you see in the up with the glass above John's head there, that's the bridge where we'd steer from. And when I'd be on watch up there at night, John would come up and visit with me. And I got to know him pretty well. And I think I like to think I helped him with some input for the creation of his song Calypso, which you'll see in a few minutes here. If you're familiar with that or not familiar with that, we'll touch upon that. But this was an evening concert John provided to us, and it was a really special night. It was a beautiful, warm evening. We're offshore, anchored in some calm waters off of one of the keys, and this was just so much fun. And that's Cousteau on the left, John Denver, Joe Thompson, one of the only other Americans during my tenure. Great man, who's passed away. Myself there, and then Louis again. Louis accompanied John on the guitar. And John played for like an hour, and it was, a lot of this was filmed, and a television special for which he won an Emmy aired that Christmas. And but after he played for about an hour, Madame Cousteau came into the picture and sat with him and made requests. I was impressed that she even knew his music, and he was so gracious that he played for roughly another hour. And that was just such a special evening. So then fast forward, this was before college, during college, and now after college. I'd graduated and I was working for a bank, and Cousteau called me and asked me if I would like to join them again. And now I was a diver, so it was even more enticing. And some of the people at the bank were like, well, how in the world, why would you ever leave this job? And other people were like, oh, you got to do it, go for it. And there was no question in my mind. So I rendezvoused with the ship in Norfolk, Virginia, and then we sailed out to look for the USS Monitor, of the famous Monitor and the Merrimack, I think I mentioned before. This was the first US Marine sanctuary, and I think there's approximately 30 now. This was the first one, and we had to find it. We had NOAA was with us, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Coast Guard to sort of help, but also to monitor us and make sure that we didn't steal anything. Because believe it or not, there's fine china and silverware and other treasures aboard the warship, the Monitor, which you see down in the center, lower center there with the gun turret, the circular gun turret. And on the right is the Merrimack, a different type of gunship. Now, this is not what caused the Monitor to sink. This was 1862, March. And then you see here some dents with the red arrows in the gun turret there. But later that year, New Year's Eve, the same year, the Monitor was being towed back to Brooklyn, New York, where it was actually manufactured. And it was being towed back there, but it got caught in heavy seas off Cape Hatteras, and it sunk. And everybody was lost. The sailors were lost. And it's been kind of for many years, it was just sitting there. But then in more recent years, in fact, the Cousteau team, we were really the first people to dive on it with permission. We found it and we dove on it. And this was not us. This is more of a modern day diver here, but this is kind of what it looked like at the bow. certain things were recovered. This is the gun turret. It was actually recovered, and you see here a major operation to do so. And it was moved to Newport News. There's a wonderful museum there called the Mariners Museum. I had the opportunity to speak there. And it's for most of the year, it's in a bathtub like this to help preserve it. But then it's occasionally drained and they go in and do maintenance on the turret. And I happened to be there when it was drained. So it was pretty cool to walk inside the bathtub there and look at those same dents that I had seen many years prior. And by the way, it was a very deep dive. It was 230 feet deep, which is on just regular compressed air. So if any of you are familiar with diving, that was basically a new world record for compressed air at that time. Since that time, in the 70s, there's been the advent of mixed gases, and now divers can go deeper for longer using mixed gases. And then finally, as we near the conclusion, thank you for your attention. We continued after diving on the Monitor. We continued down. Our destination was Martinique to dive on some shipwrecks there, and then continue on to Venezuela. And there, a oceanographic survey of the Venezuelan coastline was contracted between Cousteau and the Venezuelan government. That was good work, but we're not going to talk any more about that. But this expedition, or this venture down the coast, was pretty difficult because we had been sabotaged. Our fuel had been sabotaged in Norfolk. It actually somebody had put sugar in our fuel, so we lost one engine when we were out diving on the Monitor, and we happened to get caught in some very heavy seas, and we had to abort the expedition because the seas went from like flat seas to 20-foot seas in a matter of an hour or so, and we were on one of two engines. So we made it to the mainland. We had engine trouble, we had engine repairs, and after the repairs, we headed south again, and then the other engine failed, and we went into Jacksonville for like a week for more engine trouble. And then meanwhile, when we were in Jacksonville, that's when Philippe, the plane crashed. So this was a very difficult expedition. And it probably had a little bit of a factor in the reason I didn't continue my career there. I certainly could have. But on the other hand, I knew I kind of wanted to have a slightly more normal way of life, ultimately, eventually settle down and have a family and things like that. And I didn't want to be leaving my family for 3 months to go to sea. So anyway, it's a long story there, but we traveled down to Martinique, and our destination there was Saint Pierre, where the yellow arrow is pointing to Saint Pierre. Saint Pierre is the former capital of Martinique. Now, if you look just a little bit down the slide, you see Fort de France. Fort de France is the newer capital, because what happened is in 1902, this mountain, Mount Pelée, erupted, volcanic mountain. It erupted and it wiped out Saint Pierre. It just completely wiped out Saint Pierre, and among other things, they moved the capital because of this. But many people died, and we were there because it's a volcanic island. It got very deep very quickly offshore, so we could go and look for these shipwrecks that many had not been explored before. So we included those in our shipwreck film, and it was incredible diving. It was a little scary at times. Midnight dive where I had been asked to pull skeletons out of a shipwreck by Captain Cousteau, and I did not want to do that, but I had to honor my boss, and I still think it was kind of a weird reaction he was having to having just lost his son, and he wanted to do a proper burial of sea with these sailors. By the way, Philippe was actually buried at sea as well. That crash happened in Portugal, though. We were in Jacksonville and happened in Portugal. So finally, in closing, I had mentioned John's song. I'm not going to play it for you here, but it's a wonderful song. If you're not familiar with it or you want to hear it again, I'd recommend checking it out. And here are the lyrics that John actually wrote for me. I have them framed in my house. And I want to just point out a couple of things that I actually point out to the young people. And by the way, I get chills every time I hear this song. But in search of the answer to questions unknown, goes all the way back to kind of the learning that I mentioned up front. Part of beginning to understand and to live on the land, we must learn from the sea. So, I think every word in the song is meaningful, but those jump out at me quite a bit. I want to share those with you. And if you'd like to reach out to me, feel free. Nancy has my contact information, my email. I have multiple emails. This one works, Richard E. Hyman, Hyman @gmail. And my website is frogmenbook.com. And I'd be happy to hear from any of you. I hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for your attention, and I'd love to answer any questions you might have.
Richard, thank you very, very much. This was really enlightening, and I'm sure lots of us have questions. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask any questions you want to. I had the first question, which is a little bit more personal, which you haven't sort of talked about, but what was Cousteau like? I mean, was he a friendly guy? Was he matter of fact? What was he like?
Yeah, and I see your chat there, Nancy. Yeah, a great question. And I hope I impressed upon you my admiration for him. He was the real deal. I'm so happy I can say that. Hey, nobody's perfect, right? He had his flaws, I'm sure. I'm probably familiar with some of those, but he was a great man. And he was approachable. One of the questions I've been asked in the past is, did he have a sense of humor? And he certainly did have a great sense of humor. You say stern. I think he could be stern at times. He didn't really suffer fools, but he was approachable. He loved children, particularly as he got into his latest years. He really was even more concerned and interested in children. And the other thing I'll just add to that is like sitting around with our meals, lunch and dinner, there would be 2 seatings because it wasn't big enough to seat 26, 27 people. But I would always love it when I could sit with him during a meal, because he'd be talking about, and ideally when we had a guest aboard too, some expert, but even just with the regular crew, there was laughing, there was intellectual conversation, there was, you could be talking about anything. And so he was a great man. And I'll also say he was the hardest working person I've ever met in my life to this day.
Wow. Anybody else questions?
Yes, I have a question. Earlier, you had mentioned about living underwater for a period of time.
Yes.
What kind of a facility was that?
Yeah, well, I lived in a facility down off of Key Largo and in Florida. And I was invited by 2 university professors who actually lived in this habitat for 72 days and nights around the clock. They set a new world record, and they invited me to join them. And we did a live webcast to schools from underwater and on climate change, actually. But Cousteau's habitats were back in the 50s and 60s, late 50s, early 60s. There were 3, Con Shelf, 1, 2, and 3, Con Shelf, sort of an abbreviation for continental shelf, which I mentioned before, the crust of the shoreline. And they were one had, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think one had like 2 divers, and then 2 had several more, and then Conch Shelf 3 had several more. So more divers at greater depths for more extended periods of time. So they were doing scientific experiments. They were on underwater, looking at things underwater, but they were also studying the human body and reaction of prolonged exposure to things like that. So I was on his grandson's board of directors, and I resigned a while ago because I was focused on my own nonprofit, and I thought there was a little bit of a potential conflict. But Fabian is trying to, his name is Fabian Cousteau, and he's trying to build a new underwater habitat. I actually, to be perfectly honest, I wasn't really that keen on that idea anyway. I think it kind of has been done, and I wasn't fully supportive of it. And I thought there were other things we could do, but it goes all back to outer space and inner space. We're still learning about outer space, certainly, but there's so much we don't know about inner space under the surface of the sea.
In the habitat, what was the atmospheric pressure? The same as the ocean, or?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends on the depths. I think I was at 2 atmospheres.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah, in mine. Yeah, and it depended. I can't speak for the Conch Shelf, but we were at 2. There's when you depart, there's decompression involved, and other restrictions, like I couldn't get on an airplane for a couple days.
Right.
But very cool experience. I will say I almost died.
Yeah.
I really almost died, and I would have been very embarrassed to have died that way after all the dangerous diving I did. It was weird coming out of a habitat. I came out, and the professor, he was going to give me like a tour of this area, and they have these lines that are anchoring the habitat, and I came out, and all of a sudden I can't move, and my tank is snagged on the line. And fortunately, I was, even though a little bit rusty on my diving, I had actually done some work to. I knew I was rusty, so I did some work to make sure I was up to speed. And then I think subconsciously, my training and experience, I was calm enough that I was able to free myself.
Oh, wow.
But the other fellow, because you typically want a buddy, as it sounds like you might be a diver, Barbara. So you want to have a buddy with you, but he had already departed and gone around the habitat, and he was out of sight. So I was on my own. And the other thing that I neglected to tell you was my tank was empty, so I had no air.
Oh, gee.
Yeah. So unbeknownst to me, the air had leaked out overnight. So I was snagged with no air, but somehow I made it. And I just would have been embarrassed to have died that way. But I'm glad I did it. It was a great experience. I see a question.
Amy, you have a question?
Yeah, I see Amy's question.
Yeah, my question was, when you were on the Calypso, were you restricted to how many hours you could dive during the day?
Definitely. It depended upon where we were, how deep we were diving, how long we were staying under. Those all kind of had to be calculated and factored in. But I will say, because I've spoken with a lot of dive clubs as well, and they marvel at. It came to me speaking to one local club here several years ago, and the word reckless came to mind, because it was rather reckless. It really truly was. These were all professionals, and I was a young professional. I was learning on the job quite a bit. Anyway, to answer your question, Amy, it varied depending upon the situation. And the reason I talk about recklessness is, there are tables where you can calculate, and we sort of would follow those, but we took a lot of liberties with things. Fortunately, there was only one diving death in all the years, and it happened to be the guy that took my job. He was up in a different expedition in the St. Lawrence Seaway in Canada, and I think Cousteau called me. I was off in my career, but they thought he had an embolism, but I think he might have been electrocuted, because I had an electrical situation that was pretty scary and pretty dangerous, and I think it might have been related to that, what happened to that fellow. The only other accidents that I'm aware of over the years were there was a car crash in Africa, where a young diver I was quite friendly with visited me here in Connecticut. He passed away. And then in the South Pole, Antarctica, there was an accident where a crew member slipped on the ice and fell into the helicopter blade.
Oh,
Yeah. So, there are definitely risks. You don't have to be diving to have the risks. There's a lot of, I did it when I was young and single, so that was the time to do it.
Did, when you were, there wasn't communication between the divers when you were diving and filming, like there is now.
Right.
So did you you couldn't choreograph, but you had a plan before you dove as to what you were going to do or what you were going to try and capture within a certain amount of time. But then how would you communicate to each other, or say, that's it, I've had enough, or we're going up, or this is done, or whatever?
Yeah, great question. And you're right. The technology today is phenomenal. Even other devices like the buoyancy compensators and stuff like that, it's phenomenal compared. We did not have a buoyancy compensator on the ship, and I'll get back to your question. But the buoyancy compensator is basically an inflatable device that is mounted on your torso, and it can be helpful for a lot of things, like if you're waiting, you inflate it if you're waiting at the surface for a boat to pick you up or something, or you're trying to manage your buoyancy underwater. You want to get more buoyant or less buoyant. That can be a tool. But when I was going on my first expedition on the ship, Cousteau said, "Don't bring your BC, your buoyancy comp. Leave it at home. We don't use those." And that's where we get into like the French mentality, the machismo. We don't use those stinking BCs. He didn't say stinking, but so, and we would buckle weights on our belt, and we try to figure out the right weight. But communications would typically be hand signals. We would, I mentioned the word reckless. We would try to plan, and of course that helped me learn French very quickly. I was okay at French and okay at Spanish, but language was never my strong suit. But when you need to be learning part of the team to plan dives and then debrief after dives, you better know what's going on. And also, if you're on a ship for that long and you don't speak the language, you'll go insane, because among other things, you think everyone's talking about you, So, but anyway, yeah, basically hand signals, and we'd be looking at a watch and our air supply, but it was pretty crude, and it's pretty miraculous what they and what we accomplished when you think about it.
I have a more general question. How long did Jacques Cousteau do this?
Well, I would guess off the top of my head, I would estimate 45 years.
Jeez.
Yeah. It started in the 50s.
That's astonishing.
Yeah, started in the 50s, and he passed away in the I want to say the early 90s. And he dove pretty much right up until the end.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's astonishing.
Yeah. I see another question here. Riam, is it? In the chat, I don't know if individuals.
Oh, yeah, I see.
I don't know. Maybe I'll just read this question. I guess it's a direct message, but I'm happy if somebody wants to speak out their questions too. Did he have any concerns or discuss about climate change or water pollution? Absolutely. In fact, last week I spoke to fifth graders in New Jersey on Zoom, and they're extremely, I've been speaking with the same school for 4 years now, and we're more and more focused on the climate change subject. And I have a whole presentation about Cousteau and climate change that I gave to them. And there's actually a lot of tie-ins. And he might not have used the specific words climate change, but he was cognizant of it. And tying all the way back to the beginning of the presentation, if you were on, you know, the ground truth information, looking at the seawater and correlating that with satellite imagery and satellite data was one form of looking at climate and climate change, and certainly water pollution around the world. And that's the thing, you know, I had wanted to travel more abroad, but we were supposed to go to the Red Sea, but due to the politics at that time, we rescheduled and went to South America. But I would have loved to have seen more of the world with Cousteau, but I'm grateful for the opportunity that I had. I could have continued, but I opted to move on.
It stands to reason after all those years that he must have seen changes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, as quickly as climate change is happening, it would seem to me that he must have experienced that.
Yeah, and he probably experienced it more than anything by looking at the nature. You know, yeah. Maybe some early signs with coral reefs would be like one like canary in the coal mine kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, with all due respect to Captain Cousteau, you know, he wasn't perfect. You know, it's in the book, so I'll just mention it. One thing that really bothered me was that garbage would be thrown overboard. You know, and that shocked me and upset me every time I saw it happen. Of course, you know, this was a small ship, and we were out for weeks, if not months at a time. That's no excuse, but that happened. He wasn't perfect, and I'm sure in today's world, if he had a different ship with greater technology and so forth, you know, he would have operated differently. But yeah.
Does the Calypso still exist?
Yeah, Robin, and I'll just say, if you allow me, just another Riam had asked, did I learn the French?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you did not at all. I just want to say I did learn French. It was not easy for me, but I had to learn it in order to survive. Yeah, and Robin, tell me again your question.
Does the Calypso still exist?
Yes. Okay. Yes. In my mind, no. It was accidentally rammed in Singapore Harbor many years ago, and then it was moved to France. It was sunk and it was raised and moved to France to a shipyard, and it sat there for a while. Then it was moved to another. It was moved to another shipyard, and then only about 2 years ago it was moved to Turkey, the country of Turkey, but it was completely disassembled. A lot of it was rotten from, you know, the exposure, or rusted out. There's a campaign to raise money to rebuild Calypso. I do not support that. I do not think it should be rebuilt. I don't think Captain Cousteau would want it rebuilt. It's too bad that it got rammed and sank, because it could have been an interesting part of a museum somewhere in the world. I wanted to bring it actually to Connecticut, and or at least the Northeast, but preferably Connecticut, and build a science center around it, you know, on land, and have that as a component. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to deal with the legal aspects of doing that. It would have been complicated with the family, so I didn't do that. But so in my mind, Calypso is gone, sadly.
You know, I wanted to ask about the coral reefs that you explored. We just watched a video the other day about the coloration of the and the dying of the reefs. In the what years when you were there, were you lucky enough to see all of the reefs in their full glory of color, or was there any damage being started then when you were there?
Yeah, thanks, Linda. I guess I would say I was fortunate enough to, most of my coral reef diving was on the Belize Barrier Reef, which we talked about briefly. And in fact, I took my family back there, let's see, 5 years ago. We went there for Christmas and dove on the reef. I wanted to expose them to it. And I'm happy to say that due to conservation efforts, Belize is doing a rather nice job keeping that reef healthy. But I guess prior to that, I had been to Grand Cayman on a business trip, and I went out diving, and I was totally depressed. I think if you get off the cliffs into the deeper water, the Cayman Islands, there's some nice diving, but the shallow waters, the reefs were all bleached out. They were all white. There were really no fish, and the people I was with were not too experienced. They thought it was beautiful. I was like, oh, this is depressing. So yeah, I was fortunate in that regard. I will say that there are a lot of good initiatives underway now to grow coral. There are coral reef nurseries. I don't think I even mentioned that I started a nonprofit a few years ago. I think I mentioned it to Nancy, but I don't want to be redundant. But in brief, I started a nonprofit working with students, and earlier this year I donated it to another nonprofit, and I'm on their board advising them. But the point of the story there is it was called Future Frogmen. It's still alive, Future Frogmen. One of the students named it. They knew the name of the book, and they said, "Hey, Richard, let's call it Future Frogmen." But we were working with a few nonprofits that are growing coral in Florida and in the Caribbean specifically, but there are initiatives around the world growing coral and planting coral to grow new reefs or invigorate, more likely reinvigorating dying reefs or threatened reefs. So that's pretty exciting. That's and positive.
I was lucky enough to dive on the just snorkeling, just surface, and the Great Barrier Reef. And this documentary we showed the other day was 40% was white. Yeah. It just was heartbreaking. So I'm glad. Are there other places doing the same kind of work that you're doing to reinvigorate the coral somehow? Well, or is it just?
Yeah, there are. I'd like to say that I'm doing it, but I was collaborating with other organizations, and now that I've donated, I donated it to an organization called the Connecticut Scuba Academy, ctscuba.org, if that interests anyone. And you can also look. We have a beautiful website. Future Frogmen is part of CT Scuba. That's futurefrogmen.org. It's a rather pretty informative website. We've got some great videos and podcasts there. The website is out of date. I'm after them to. I'm probably going to do some editing. I'm trying to let them. It's their baby, so I'm trying to let them do it. But anyway, there are organizations around the world, and if you want to reach out, I'd be happy to, give you some names of other ones, or I could shoot Nancy an email or something.
Well, I feel more encouraged listening to you with what you're doing than I did at the end of that documentary. It was just heartbreaking to see what has happened. They mostly said it was because of the warming of the ocean.
Yeah,
So,
it is. It's that and acidification, there's only so much carbon that the ocean can absorb. But I tell you, one thing I really loved about working with these young people is, they gave me a lot of inspiration and hope. They're so smart, and they're upset, so many of them want to do their part. So
Good.
they have a future, and their children have a future,
yeah, good. Well, thank you for doing your part.
Oh, of
Thank
course.
you.
Of course.
Any other questions? Well, Richard, thank you very much. This has been really wonderful. I know we've all appreciated it and learned a lot and had some fun listening to your reminiscences. So again, thank you very much for coming, and buy his book.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank
for
you.
your attention. Have a good rest of the evening.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you all for coming. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.